Brian, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So, I think this is going to be fun from the perspective of, and I've touched upon this kind of topic a few years ago, of calling it like the mortar between all of the builders and everything that's kind of going in between the ecosystem. You're stepping into the presidency of Entrepreneurs Organization (EO). I want to start with like, what's EO? What's its core mission, and how does it fit into this kind of whole in between space?
Yeah. Well, first of all, happy to be here. I hope today is as fun as our coffee meeting and our ability to riff for what was that, like 2 hours. So we'll keep it a little shorter for the audience. But yeah, happy to be president of EO here in Austin. So EO is essentially a membership group that is made up of founders, owners, CEOs, all who have businesses in excess of $1 million, and they're in EO to essentially grow, right? Get to their potential as entrepreneurs.
And so what is it that something like EO is offering? Like what's the core group of getting these people together? Is it that closed door, okay, now no one's listening, you can actually talk about some of these things? Is it the connections? Is it the riffing? All of the above? Like really what is it that you're trying to provide in that case?
Yeah, I always think of it as like the third room, right? One of my rooms is my home life. My other room is my work life. And then where EO comes in is providing all the things that you just mentioned and more. You don't go to EO to have somebody tell you what to do. In EO, you go and you experience share and you do what's called Gestalt. And you talk about all kinds of things: life, health, relationships, business, obviously. And you learn from peers. You learn from people who have been in the trenches, more often than not, are still in the trenches. And you get takeaways that should impact your ability to be an entrepreneur, to be a better dad, husband, friend, better person as a whole.
What do you think? So interesting you used the term third rooms. I've heard the third space before, right? Which is home, work, and then whether it was the Starbucks or the coffee shop where a lot of these kind of creative collisions happened. But in this, the nature of using the word room does give it a little more of a closed off frame. So
Yeah,
how do you kind of think about the difference? Do you think it is adjacent to the idea of the third space? Do you think the third space was a marketing gimmick, or is there something to this kind of other area that we all can go to, work, connect?
purposeful nomenclature. I used it purposely, and here's why. Because when you're in the room, the door's closed. What happens with these get togethers in what's called forum, usually 6 to 10 people within the larger organization, which in Austin is about 220 members, is you have conversations that go to what we call the 5%. These are the most intimate conversations, and they're entirely confidential. Nothing goes outside that room, which is very different than a space where you're kind of rubbing elbows, networking, there to maybe get business, which there's a lot of other groups that are that. EO is not that. EO is a protected, safe environment, and hence the use of the word room.
So how does it differ? Like I've seen a lot of these like YPO, Vistage, Post Exit Founders, Hampton, Chief. Like I feel like I'm seeing a lot of these. Are the complementary value props that these are all going, and you kind of see them as a stack, or is it really this is we're just kind of in this moment of this kind of real competitive set of groups that are offering this connective space or connective room, using your terminology?
Yeah, I mean, so you and I talked about this a little bit before, right? With the explosive growth of Austin, what you start to see is a lot of opportunities across various ecosystems with various people. So what I'll say is, and somebody used this phrase the other day and I loved it, is healthy things grow. Okay. So Austin's healthy. It's growing. And as a result, there's a bunch of these membership organizations that are also coming to Austin, sprouting up in Austin and growing further in Austin. So if you look at kind of the ecosystem of these, yeah, there's EO, there's YPO, there's Hampton, there's Chief, there's a bunch of other organizations that have been around, Provisors, ACG, you name it, right? And all of them are, uh, in some ways, complementary if you look at it from the standpoint of the age and stage you're in and the life cycle of maybe your business and what you're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, practically speaking, time is everyone's greatest asset and it's limited, it's finite, right? So they become naturally competitive in some ways. You can't be part of them all, in my estimation, and you may not want to be. So it's like any other thing. Where are you choosing to spend your time? And that's driven by what? That's driven by the people. That's driven by the value you're going to get out of it. And those things can change over time, right? Relationships change over time. What you need changes over time. What you deem as valuable changes over time. So there's a slot for all of those.
And how do you think about the in all of them? Because I've seen obviously some are, as we said, just within the name, like post exit founders that has a particular, you know, frame around what who you're attracting versus YPO has its particular frame versus Chief has its frame as something like, well, I think it's a twofold. One is something like Austin is growing and we're seeing the different frames, right? Like you can start having that segmentation where, okay, am I looking for this group versus that group because we're almost too big, at least something I've said before, we're almost too big for having the one group to rule them all, versus if you're kind of in that 0 to 1 phase of an ecosystem's growth, the idea of having 100 groups makes zero sense. But then on the other side, and I know, like you said, you become the president of EO Austin. A lot of these other groups as well are also national groups with local chapters. So how does that kind of fit into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll speak about EO first. EO, we have this chapter here, like I mentioned before, and we've grown through the years and we're continuing to grow. We're part of a global organization. I mean, EO has taken me to leadership conferences in Cape Town, South Africa, Singapore. I was in Hawaii a few weeks ago. So it depends on the group, the network, and the rest. But I think the real question you're asking is with this influx of numerosity of options, is that good or bad? Is that something that Austin actually needs, or is this something where, you know,
So,
maybe groups are opportunistic about ways to create, a business model?
well, so okay, so I want to actually separate those things out. Because I think generally speaking, I think they're good because I think we need more of that connective tissue. Because as different pieces are growing, whether they be sector specific or whatever, that connective tissue between is more and more vitally important, right? Like, you want the quantum people to talk to the bio people, to talk to the robotics people. They don't need to talk to them every day, which is why you have kind of these centers of excellence and these kind of micro ecosystems. But there has to be these interesting threads that kind of connect them all together, and whether they be an entrepreneurial organization, a AI organization, whatever they may be. I think then second to that question, to your point, is when there is growth and opportunity, it does bring out the grifters as well. And so you do have these kind of organizations pop up that are at best just very transactional and not a lot, don't necessarily offer a lot of value, I think. Is it worst being, very extractive, right? And it's about like, oh, well, I'm going to get all these people in a room because they're all there together to sell. And of course, people who've been around this for so long smell it quickly and be like, okay, I'm not going back to that one, or this is a bad one. But then, of course, it's that kind of the newbies, the fresh, some of the area that I think that we are still. I don't know. I have questioned whether it's a scale issue or if it's a fragmentation issue. I think it's both. But there's kind of those really young, that cohort of really young founders, right? Like the 20 somethings that you kind of see always flowing into Silicon Valley because that's the zeitgeist. Like, oh, I want to make it in tech, I go there. And like that's the groups who don't necessarily have the knowledge base or the history to be like, oh, well, here are all the yellow flags when as soon as I walked in the room for this group.
Yeah, I mean, look, let me take those in kind of reverse order. All right. So the concern about maybe this vulnerable group who is being preyed upon by an organization that's trying to start a member group and grow. My take on that is people are smart. They're gonna learn very quickly if they're getting value, if there truly is something that's worth the dollars, the time, whatever resources they're committing to it. I wish we were in this world where that stuff didn't happen. There weren't grifters, there weren't people looking to do that, but some of that comes with the natural growth of anything, and I think Austin's included in that. But to the first question is really where I think it's at. What you were talking about, this connective tissue, first of all, these groups can definitely coexist and there can be a ton of value, but that presupposes that connective tissue is happening, that there is this kind of recognition that the um, you know AI group has an interest of interacting with the CPG group that has an interest that's interacting with the professional services group, and they see value in doing so. And I am of the belief that that absolutely is happening here in Austin, and that needs to happen in order for this city to kind of continue and get to the next level. And my personal belief is this is, we talk about the ability to have either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. What makes Austin special and has always made Austin special for me since I moved here, over a decade ago, was the welcoming nature and the let's make this thing bigger and better. The question is, has it become too big that it's no longer better? I don't think so yet. But what I do think about a lot, and I have these conversations a lot, is there's a mindset of, can we make the table bigger, but continue to welcome people at the table? As opposed to, there's a cool kids table, right? Maybe somebody's made it, they've become successful, they've had their exit, or maybe they got their venture funding and they become exclusionary, right? I hope at the end of the day what Austin becomes is a place that the cool kids, so to speak, make the table bigger, and that's the definition of cool, not the exclusionary piece. And the way these groups can fit into that is from that mindset and that kind of ethos.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree, and I think it's been very different than what I've heard from other places and seen being, which is, and I've said this on the pod, and I said it to you when we talked at first, which is, one of the superpowers of Austin, and I think, as I've learned, I think it's a Texas thing, not just an Austin thing. Of there's a culture, open networks, and a culture of helping, right? And so there is this. It's a mindset. It's a thing that really goes out to everybody. Like it's part of Austin, and then you have the people who come into it and then really buy in, and those who don't, they either feel isolated or are isolated, right? So I've had kind of, it's been interesting. I've had kind of both conversations both ways, where I've had some longtime Austinites saying like, "Oh, well, the Silicon Valley types are all very exclusionary," and of course, I always kind of scratch my head, going, "But I've met a bunch of, I've met almost all of them, um, and the same thing. Like they've met a bunch of people in Austin, so I don't know what's going on there." Or I've also met other Silicon Valley people though that would have come and said like, well, I'm here, and why am I not going to things? And I think the other aspect of this open network component is this frontier mindset in Austin. And so you have to, I don't know if this was always true or if this is a now thing, but you have to work. And this idea that whether it be, as again, from someone who's been in Austin for a long time or someone who's new, the idea like I just show up and suddenly every door should open for me, that doesn't work. I don't think that works anywhere, really. This idea,
Yeah,
um,
I agree. And look, here's I'll say two things about that. One is, and this is an EO phrase. We say EO is a gym, not a spa. And what that means is you got to put in the work. It doesn't mean you just join this organization and all of a sudden everything's perfect, right? You have to actually still make a very intentional effort to meet people, to contribute, to take advantage of the opportunities, right? In order to get value out of it. And I think that reigns true for Austin as a whole, right? From what you said, this frontier standpoint, right? Austin was never when it was never perfect. It hasn't been made. It's not there yet,
Right.
and that's a good thing. That's a mindset thing.
But yeah,
So let's
you
keep.
never want to. As soon as you make it and you're there, well, that's the end. That's the top.
That's the
Right.
worst.
Yeah.
Complacency is the worst, right? It's the journey that's worth it. It's what's that phrase? It's something over being, right? It's the growing, it's the doing over actually being what that ultimate thing is. And that's important. And I think that needs to continue to be woven in Austin as a whole, but that's definitely part of EO. The other thing I'll say is these generalizations, right? And I'm not saying you, I'm saying just this idea that, okay, Austin is this or it's that, or Silicon Valley is this or it's that, or whatever. The generalizations can be very dangerous. I'm a particularization guy. I like looking at specifics and talking about that thing, knowing all the facts relative to it, and then making a conclusion based upon that. Once you start generalizing, you're you're either offending other people because it's just not accurate, or you're lending credence to what this maybe rising narrative might be, which to a lot of people who are boots on the ground would absolutely disagree. So I think it's really important to go down that path of fact finding.
Yeah, I think. I mean, to your point. I mean, a phrase that I throw out there a lot is you follow the data, not the headlines. I mean, I think
Love it.
but
Love
it
it.
is the point. Like narratives are so important and so valuable, and you see this. I mean, I think that I'm in the process of writing an essay, and um, will cross my fingers that by the time this airs, it'll actually be out. Um, but
I'll hold you to that.
yeah, um, but the at the end of it, it gets into that the value and power of some of these. We're not even talking about superstar, but these uh, ecosystems that have rang throughout history is the power of mythos and myth that they create these. It's not even just narratives; it just goes beyond that. I mean, and like in the essay, so like I'm not spoiling it because I'm gonna hold and get it out before this comes out. Um, I'm talking about like Silicon Valley, and I'm talking about Renaissance Florence, right? And the word Renaissance is used long. It means something. It still means rebirth. It still means the creation of the something new, even though it came out of this ecosystem from 500 years ago. And like it's those stories and those that kind of really create, and that's one of the reasons as I dig into this whole idea of like the Silicon XYZ and why I hate it so much is because you cannot create the myths of your ecosystem of your set if you're starting off by saying like we're a carbon copy of those guys.
Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing. those those kinds of narratives are important to lean into, especially if you're in a city like Austin. Keep Austin weird, right? The cool factor, the grittiness, the desire to actually make an impact and do things like that. But you also have to be mindful of, and I come from the Midwest. I grew up in Cleveland. What do people think about? What do I hear from way too many people? Oh, you're from the Rust Belt. Well, before we were the Rust Belt, we were one of the most burgeoning parts of the country. Everybody wanted to be in Cleveland, Detroit, Pittsburgh, right? It was. I'll just give you a quick example. When my dad comes to visit Austin, he counts the cranes, and he's recognized that Austin has a lot of things that Cleveland and those cities used to have, which is the growth. And it's very different, right? But at the end of the day, once the narrative goes the other direction, it's very hard to change. And I think that's what we've been talking about here, right? Is can we keep the positive narrative of Austin?
Well, and it's interesting because you just said something that I hadn't even thought of. Did the term Rust Belt come about during the decline and in kind of the leaving of manufacturing, or did that exist prior to that in just a kind of a play on steel? Like I actually don't know the timing origin of, because you can say go either way, but like there is obviously a declining element of calling something rust.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right? The natural order of operations is, something is pristine before it gets rusty. So I would venture to guess that most people would follow that kind of path.
Yeah. No, but but the and it's funny because I think that there's the narratives, there's these things that are changing. What Austin is this or that, and in my 4.5 years here, I think I've really come up. There are two things that Austin is that's set in stone: change and complaining about change. Like we had, you've got, as I said, I didn't realize, I mean, it makes perfect sense when you think about it, but that obviously that Austin wasn't the first name of the city, it was Waterloo. uh and then the same thing, like I remember seeing, this was like maybe a year or so into when I was here, there was a somehow on socials, like I saw a Statesman article from the 80s that was, oh, everyone's moving here, traffic sucks. I was like, okay, you could have written that yesterday. And then there was, this was like on some 100th anniversary or something. It was like ATX Today put out showing some articles from like the late 1800s, and you laugh at how like similar the articles are. It's like the boom Austin, Austin boom town, but too many people are moving here. I'm like, really? You're like at 40,000. I'm making up numbers. You're 40,000 people, right?
Right.
Um, so it's always this kind of changing mindset, but it seems to have been absorbing some of those elements, because I think one of the things that I've had some interesting discussions about, because I've always listed all these superpowers of Austin, but haven't thought as much about what's like the shadow side of them. And one of the issues that I think that Austin has is it has a significant number of a higher amount of entrepreneurs. And I don't, and this is not me saying like frauds, it's not like nothing of that nature. It's the people who are building, but they're not really building. And I think it's because of two things. Um, One is because of the shadow side of this open networks and culture of helping, is it's not quite the sharp enough elbow to be like, no, that's not a good idea. Like that's not going to grow. So they kind of consistently stay in this area. And then of course the other is, which I think is a problem that's solving itself, is just kind of a literal rocket ship density, where you have, oh, I know somebody who's at that amazing company, or I know, I'm not 6 degrees away from somebody's at these kind of, these unicorns or these companies that are really taking off. My buddy works over there, and then you kind of see like, well, that's what they're doing every day. Is that what I'm doing every day? And you literally see that contrast. And I think as we're having so many more companies take off, that part's taking care of it, that everybody will be within 1 or 2 degrees of somebody at one of these companies. And then you start getting this idea of what it really takes to build.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mark Cuban, I think, coined that phrase, entrepreneur. He talks about it a lot on Shark Tank, right? People come in with these great ideas or visions, but are they in the trenches? Are they doing the work? And to bring it back to kind of these membership organizations, that's part of the beauty of these. You essentially get and this is especially true in EO, an accountability partner, right? You have somebody who's calling you out on what you're doing. If you come into the meeting every month and you talk about, here's what I'm going to do, or this is the path that I want to do, comes a point in time where the person next to you says, well, are you doing it? Is it done? Show me what the output is of that. So I think people will, like I said before, self-select where they want to be. There's some other groups where the reason for the group is they want to be investors and they want to place capital. They want to, coattail invest with others. And then there's others where they just want business development. So, whether somebody's an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, a wantrepreneur, all those things are going to exist. What I think is powerful is if you truly want to be not a entrepreneur, if you truly want to be somebody who's building something, who's growing something, the opportunities abound here, and they always have.
So do you see? And I agree, and I think it's just the acceleration now is just like through the roof. I mean, one of the things like you would point back to say the venture bubble of 21, 22, and you're like, oh well, like all these things take off, but then you know this year looks like we're going to beat that year. So we kind of when we settled back in kind of the 23, 24 period, it was above. We reverted to a new norm, which was above everything previous to that. And then now, as you got your footing, then you kind of we went up, right? Like Q1 was bigger than I think every year. It was like the fourth biggest year. So yeah, Q1 alone was the fourth biggest year in Austin.
Mhm.
So when I look at that across, I'm like, yeah, I think that this might be, has the potential to be like the biggest year. It's an interesting question though when I think about these groups and this kind of the mortar and how and it almost gets back to your room versus space analogy because like so I was part of a mastermind group, but so I'm a fan of the idea and concept now, but it was extremely valuable, but it was friends. This was a few years ago, but it was like friends from high school, like people I'd known for 20 plus years. We all were in very different careers and very different paths, so it was this kind of easy non-competitive space when like one guy's a lawyer, one guy's in finance, one guy's in tech. Like there's not, it's easy for us to like offer advice to each other that we don't so much have a like, well, this is how I did it. It's kind of in that space. And so, you know, there there is, I think, obviously a strong value to those organic groups. The whole joke now with like the group chats is the new social media kind of situation. And so do you see then these one, you have the startup activity growth, as you said, and you have these groups kind of being that second order effect of that. Is it also an effect of this kind of like generalized loneliness epidemic?
I think that's accurate. I think there's been an explosion of these groups since COVID, for sure. But there's a big difference between kind of a social club type thing or a social group, and what I think the real driver of most of these defined groups we've been talking about. And again, it goes back to what is the individual trying to accomplish, and does that group fill that need? And I think at the end of the day, a lot of it will just depend on what you as the individual, where you want to spend your time. Going back to that, finite resource, right? And I personally have been part of many a groups, and some I go in, some I go out, some I've been in for years. And I think that's going to continue to be the case with a lot of people who maybe have been lonely, maybe are working from home now, as opposed to before they weren't. So long as the mortar that I've heard you use a couple times on this discussion stays there, meaning reflective of what pulls people together as opposed to separates them, great. I don't see a downside to it.
How do you think about whether it be these groups or other ways of this kind of connective tissue? I think about we have kind of almost a if you frame the personas in the growth, and this is kind of an overly simplified mental framework, but you'll have the newbies, whether that being young or new to the system, right? You'll have then kind of like the hustlers, and I mean it in the best way possible. Like, okay,
Yep.
we're early. I'm just working, trying to get things done. Um, that used to be the I didn't have this next phase, but somebody said, which almost the teenagers is not the good word, but I need a better one for it. But this is like okay, I've made it. Like I've got funding, I've got revenue. I like the organization's real. We're doing things. Um, and then kind of the last is, call it unicorn, whether it be unicorns or, Michael Dell's, whatever, like that kind of group, right? And there's this, if you think of that, and then I want to put like obviously grifters off the side here, right? But like the problem is that type, obviously, we said, kind of keeps coming into these realms. And when I think about the way of that connection, right? If you have that kind of line of people, you want to make multiple boxes, right? Like there's situations where like, look, the unicorn founder is going to have the small dinners. It's just that, like, okay, great, that is and that what it is. Um, but you don't want just the newbies all together. You want like these different kinds of concentric circles where people are. There's sometimes we like, is there a thing that has everybody? There's this thing that has not, and some of these like mortar types of whether they be the EOs, or is it the social clubs, or is it the traditional networking? Like, how do we think about all those different elements of kind of bringing those that grouping together? And then, of course, obviously, you layer on top, as we said earlier, the you know you want the AI people talking to the CPG people on
Yeah.
enough of a basis that you have those. Wow, that's who the hell knew about if I did this AI thing in CPG, and boom, there's something's born of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, put all the groups to the side. It really boils down to, it takes two to tango. It takes the person who wants to go to the gym, who wants to grind, who wants to climb, who's going up the ladder and wants to seek out mentorship, accountability, expansion of network, cross-pollination across industry. But you know what else it takes? It takes the person that's already climbed the ladder, turning around and helping pull that person up. And that's what I think Austin, you know, is known for. That's how I found my way here when I first came. I pounded the pavement. I met as many people as I could, and I had people pulling me up. I thought I was pretty motivated, but people were saying, "Okay, let's go to the next level." So I think you need to have the mindset at both levels: the that kind of startup, gritty growth phase, but then also the people define success differently. But for our purposes, the people who have maybe started a company, grew that company, sold the company. And maybe even if we follow kind of some of the stereotypes, right? I said I don't like generalizations, but the stereotypes out there right now of, okay, sold company, now I'm going to go become a VC, now I'm going to go do, investing, etc. Or it's the others who I've exited my company, now I'm going to become a coach or a mentor. So there's these paths that people follow. But if it's the person as the want at both the top and the bottom, I, I see nothing but positivity coming out of that.
I think one of the things is the there's this ask I feel like all the time of the kind of the top, that it feels demanded, or I've seen this across philanthropy. I've seen this across like, well, now that you've done it, you must do this, right? And it's this almost you know entitlement to time, value, treasure, whatever these kinds of things, versus the just getting back to the same kind of incentive alignment we all usually think of. I mean, I think there are people who uh, one of the things that I've generally kind of ascribed to is, you know, if the ecosystems thrive, I thrive, right? And it's a second, third order effect, right? Like it's not the direct, like, okay, well, I got to have this to this transaction to this kind of thing. And I think that it's almost, the people that I know, it kind of who that like that feels like almost a better angle and a better discussion to have than merely of like, well, now that you've made it, you need to give back.
Yeah, I mean, I hate the word entitlement. It's up there with the word cancer to me, right? It is something that I think is poisonous at whatever age, stage, level you're at. So if anything is interpreted as being an entitlement, then no thanks. But what I will say is, to your point, there has to be this, not this demand that the person at the bottom does it or the person at the top does it, but instead this desire, this want, for whatever the reason might be. It might be, I'm a lonely founder, I need a mentor. It might be on the other end of the spectrum, I'm a lonely rich person that people only want stuff from me because I've made it. I want to go back to the days where I enjoyed the growth, the grind, that I'm adding value in a different way. You got to find what the thing is that fuels people. And sometimes it's that connection, the connective tissue you talked about. Sometimes it's something deeper than that. But whatever that is, that's the key. And I think that's what these groups try and do. They look at across the board and they say, okay, here's the problem. If you're $1 million company, EO could be that solution for you. If you're a $3 million company, Hampton might be it. If you're a $15 million company, YPO might be it. And different problems, right, or needs or wants come with each of those stages, just from a business standpoint, not to mention personally, health wise, aging wise, relationship wise. So you got to hone in on what are the things that are going to make people desire and want to do it as opposed to feel like they have to do it.
Right. Or others telling them, I'm entitled to your time, money, treasure, etc. Which is
Yep.
I've just it's funny, I've heard that more often than not. And I think it's always I don't know, when I it's something that kind of sets me in a question of like when you hear like, oh well, especially for things that have like national chapters or national or equivalents in other places. I don't care whether it's an institution or a group, and it's like, well, this equivalent of me in X place just got this, got tons of money, or this, or tons of connection, and then I it kind of, and like, so why aren't we getting that here? And it's funny because it's always, this is, it kind of leads to like who is running in the entrepreneurial mindset that should be in these kinds of, I don't care whether it's a small networking group or something as extensive as like EO. You have to have an entrepreneurial mindset, because if the answer is, well, so and so got all this kind of buy-in in XYZ city, but we aren't getting it here. The question isn't, well, those people aren't giving of their time, or that's that entitlement mentality. It's like, well, clearly you're the value prop or the offer, like any other business, any other entrepreneurial venture. Do you understand the customers? Do you understand what you're building? And if they're choosing not to be involved in whatever way it is, whether it be anything from sitting in panels to giving money to time, or these things, like, back to our almost like entrepreneur, these things, like, well, look in the mirror. Like, what are you doing to bulk up? What are you doing to create the environment that somebody wants to be involved in?
Yeah, look, I mean, we just did our kickoff for the strategy summit for the year ahead for EO Austin. Okay. And we are, by all accounts, a very successful chapter. We're one that a lot of other chapters reach out to. We're one that Global highlights regularly. And you know what my mantra has been is unite, inspire, and equip our members so that at the end of the year, they will answer this one question with a resounding yes, which is, are you a better entrepreneur? Are you a better entrepreneur? If they answer that question the way we want them to, it means we've created that value. It means that we're not resting on our laurels, becoming complacent, doing the things that you just talked about. So I truly believe that any organization, we can talk about for-profit, nonprofit, membership,
Right.
any organization, it if you're not adding value, creating value, like I said, people will self-select and move on. And we don't want to build in these kind of one-off cases where, well, you have this bad apple or somebody who is entitled. Like, those things exist, they always have, they always will. But the
Yeah.
beauty of a group is that that group can also self-select, right, and squeeze out those types of things.
Yeah. No, there's a certain kind of harmony and flow that happens within any group, whether it be small to big. And harmony is probably too much of a word that's kind of connective, because there are plenty of groups that like argument and debate, and like, harmonious is not the way that you would describe the group, but it's a very well functioning group.
Yeah. Well, think about when we had coffee, right? We talked about Lord of the Flies, and
Yes.
you told me that most people's who've watched the movies, and maybe even read the books, have a incorrect interpretation, and it doesn't match what actually happened.
Yeah,
Right?
this
Recall
is
that?
yeah. So I remember you were saying this is like obviously anyone who's read, back in high school, there's Lord of the Flies. The children were on shipwrecked on the island, and then it all went to hell. It's the short version, and I don't remember specifically in this. I'd have to look. Is if this was the story that the book was based off of, or that this particular shipwreck happened afterwards. It almost became a real world possibility. And the point was that these kids did get marooned for some period of time, and my understanding was it was the opposite of Lord of the Rings. Not Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings would have been cool. Opposite of Lord of the Flies, right? It was they actually worked together. They helped each other. It was not this kind of, degradation and everyone's gonna kill each other and all that. Which, of course, when you look at throughout history and the creation essentially of tribes, of cities, and like it is the hey, we must survive. And so there is that combination. It was something I was listening to. I forget what it was on some podcast. I forget who had said it, but it was if you drop like one human into the jungle, you've created a nice meal for the jungle. If you drop 100 humans into the jungle, you've created a new apex predator.
Yeah. Well, I look, two things on that. One, it reminds me of that phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
Right? Have you heard that?
Yes.
And look, these membership groups should accomplish that. And if we're this society of cohesiveness and togetherness, that I know it doesn't feel that way always, and there's so much divisiveness. Like history has proven that out, right? So, the other thing I'll say is for the Lord of the Flies. We talked before about narrative and the power of narrative. Well, again, what is the narrative when you talk to most people about Lord of the Flies? It's how everything can go to hell, right? And
Right.
everybody's fighting for their own peace. When in actuality, that may not have been the case. Now, do people go and do the additional research and fact finding, or do they just go with the crowd? That's a fundamental question that's going to dictate how things happen going forward. And again, once that narrative starts to change, that's scary and that's tough. And I think that's why we have these conversations. I have these conversations all the time with people like, what is Austin like these days? Which group should I join? Where should I spend my time? Hopefully the narratives are accurate and still positive.
Well, I mean, to your point, like the narratives and the way they create. I was just thinking. I was talking about like Upton Sinclair's *The Jungle* the other day, and so the book from like the late
Yeah.
1800s on the meatpacking industry, and his goal was about like workers and their ability. It was obviously doing like I think unionization and all that. But of course, what happened was he just disgusted everybody with the meatpacking industries, like the way they treated it was gross, and led to a bunch of like actually like health reforms instead. And I think the line he said something like, "I was aiming for people's hearts and I hit them in the stomach."
Hmm.
So even
Yeah.
even the narrative sometimes that you try to create, in this case, what Upton Sinclair tried to do, like it kind of takes off a life of its own.
For sure. And look, I didn't know that we were going to be talking about required high school reading. I like it. But yeah, I mean, there's certain things that are set out to do one thing and go a different way. Think about like that documentary Super Size Me, the McDonald's thing.
Mm-hmm.
That guy ate McDonald's for 30 days in a row, and that was very intentional to go out and expose what that type of fast food eating does to the body,
Right.
right? And it had its desired effect. But some of these others, clearly, to your point, do not.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that so many of these ecosystems don't quite understand is the narrative aspect of it. I mean, even we see like during the summer of COVID, the two ecosystems that were most on the zeitgeist that were winning was Austin and Nashville. And then Mayor Suarez from Miami, they had that whole tweet exchange where I think it was Dillian from Founders Fund said, "Hey, could we move Silicon Valley to Miami?" And Suarez goes, "How can I help?" And with that singular tweet, Nashville was knocked off the national stage, and everyone was talking about Austin and Miami as the two big kind of winners from that perspective. And of course, the importance of it is you have to match the story, and you have to kind of keep reality has to kind of keep catching up, because I've seen obviously recently some of the people who had moved to Miami now have moved back. I think
Yeah.
it was powerful in the fact that I think using like VC funding, I don't know exactly where it was, but it was somewhere between like 10 and 15 prior to that tweet. Now it's usually like 9, 10. So just that story alone catapulted it forward. It just happened not to be the reality of where it was, which, compared to the story it was telling. There was such a large gap that then you start having well, you're not, you're the fraud type of accusations come out, like it's not real, this isn't happening, versus like, well, no, the story got ahead of itself.
Yeah, and isn't this the importance of going to the source? And you mentioned this before. The cool thing about Austin, you know, whatever degree of separation, if you want to go to insert company name, Unicorn in Austin, you still have a good chance of talking to people there. It's not a world whereby you just have to listen to the narrative because you don't have access.
Right.
If you want access, you can get access. You have to want it. You have to put in the work to get it, right? But going in and it's the classic old Ronald Reagan trust but verify.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people don't have trust these days, but my question is, are they doing anything to go verify? Are they doing the fact finding mission? Are they hearing what the narratives are around these groups, whether they're good, bad, whether they're for them or not? Or are they going to people who are in them, people who are running them, people who have had experience with them, right? You'd never buy a house and renovate it with a builder you haven't vetted, who you've talked to for referrals for, et cetera. So why do we so easily do that in other aspects of our lives? I don't know, but I think that's part of the problem that we see. And again, that's a generalization, but I think it's an ever growing accurate one because information's so readily available, and you can look at something quickly, get an opinion, read the headline, and follow it, as opposed to having to really go in and figure out accurate, and then do I want to follow it?
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the census and domestic migration numbers are always mine that drive me up a wall in terms of the headline versus the data, right? Like it's the recent headline is like, oh, the people number of people moving to Texas is declining, and it's awful. And like, okay, so if you actually look at the data, the last 2 years are less than 20 and 21 and 22, like that pop, like 100%. That's what the data says. But it's still above 19, 18, 17. Like it's still at an accelerated rate than it was previously. And clearly, like myself included, that 21, 22 through 20 through 22 pop was not just the additional gravity, but everybody who kind of like thought about it at one point and said, okay, now I'm going to go do. So
Mm-hmm.
there was that kind of like, there was this kind of bulge in there. But it's funny because it was another article. You had a census data come out like recently. It was like Texas and Florida, like the big like domestic, like they're decreasing. Their domestic migration is decreasing, while New York, and it was one other place, like is increasing. Okay, that's the headline. You go to the data. So the rate at which people are moving into Texas and Florida is less than it was last year, but still higher than it was in pre-COVID. New York is still negative. So you have the thing saying like, oh, well, New York's on the rise. I'm like, it's still negative. Like, how are you spinning? Like, it may be stopping the bleeding. Like like it may be a positive trend. I'm not going to argue that they're might be finally doing something differently and not like losing people left and right. But it's still a highly. It was like, yeah, I went from like losing 200,000 people in like 20. I'm making up the numbers. Something to this effect. Like losing 200,000 people in 2023 to losing 100,000 in 2024. You're right. That's the right direction. But to have the headline being like New York is doing amazing in this case, and Florida and Texas are doing like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, and look, I'm going to say it. I thought we were going to do a podcast and get through an hour without using the word or the phrase AI, but I'm gonna throw it in.
I almost I can't at this point. It's always just a matter of
Yeah,
when it comes
I
up.
mean, that's right. That's right. I just hope you don't make the title of this whatever you're going to title it and then add AI to get more viewers. But at the end of the day, there is there's almost no excuse these days for not doing the fact finding because of the accessibility of AI and what used to be search engines. You could get more data, but are people going to do it? Probably not. I heard somebody told me the other day, they're like, look at history. We've had these things called libraries full of books, full of all the answers, full of all the experience, full of all the direction you need. Does that mean people go in and they read them? No. Does that mean we're avoiding or not repeating things that happened in the past? No. So the narratives aren't going to go away. It's how do the people who care control the narrative? And I mean that in a positive
Right.
way, not manipulating it,
Right.
but when they're starting to see the narrative shift. So for example, Austin's overgrown, the housing market, it's peaked, it's going down. Austin can't be what Silicon Valley is. It's proven that. These are all narratives. I'm pretty sure if we dig into the facts collectively, and if the right people are leading that charge and framing the narrative, that it's still the place and will be for a long time to come.
Well, and part of it is I think there's the framing the narrative, and then there's like just getting louder. I mean, that's one of the
Mhm.
things that I've noticed in some of these it is I said Austin is I think that's been a powerful part of it is it's had storytellers and people in who are in that persona, not the skill set, but actually the I think there's a very clear ecosystem persona of storytellers and it has a value to it. And so that has existed, so people have kind of seen that go through. But when you have only like one side, and this isn't being like political, like if you have like just one like media, people say, well, Austin's over Austin, and nobody's saying anything. And so in many ways, I felt like for a while, it was like, oh, well, you need to fight and argue and debate with some of these, like, or no, you just stand up and just get on the. That's the other part of it is you have so much of AI and like access, but you also, whether it be through Substack, social, like you can just go out and say, you can be like, no, this is here. I'll show you the data. I'll show you this, and just get up and say things. It's crazy.
Yeah, everybody has a voice, and look, I'm a proponent of the First Amendment and everybody being able to go out and say what they want, but it doesn't mean what they're saying is always accurate, beneficial,
Yeah.
valuable, good, right? Um, it's kind of like think about a company culture, right? What do they say about culture? They say it's what people say about the company when the owner or the founder's not around. Um, People spend a lot of money and a lot of time to build a culture, and Austin, I think, has that culture, that fabric, that feel that um, a lot of people want. But to your point, if other people start becoming the loudest person in the room, well, then it's incumbent upon stepping in and stepping up and disagreeing, and that's great, healthy debate.
Yeah.
Um, so
So from a that mortar perspective right now, I mean, what is the whether they be the third rooms, the third spaces, the any of these things? Do you think the big demands are? Is it narrative? Is it that we should like telling these stories? Is it these, you know, the CPG and the AI person coming together? Is it the talent density? Would say like, oh, we've got these verticals in here. Like, you know what? We are in making AI. We need more deep researchers or whatever they may be. Like what this kind of in between zone, what is the biggest demand that we have now? And I think that changes obviously over time, right? You'd asked this 15 years ago, probably something very different, but given where we are as an ecosystem, what are the demands of it?
yeah, I think it's several things. It's we've talked about narrative, who we are, what do we stand for. That needs to continue to be front and center. I think it's also, and this is an interesting concept when you think about membership, which requires, um, you know, acceptance, but avoiding kind of cliques and silos. And like I said, having a cool kids only section, instead, make it bigger. Right. I used to say that the beauty of Austin was, instead of having one pizza pie and everybody fighting over slices, there's just more and more pizzas coming off the oven. Right. And I think that will continue to be an important thing for the city, for us. I also think it's a support system. It's founders helping founders. It's owners helping owners. It's what we talked about before, kind of that ladder analogy I used. If that is the ethos, if that is the goal, if that is the belief, then all those things move Austin forward. And then it's the cross pollination piece, right? We hear a lot about in Austin how it's so expensive now. What makes Austin special? The artists, the music, right? Whatever it might be, the hospitality industry. They can't sustain living here, or they may not be able to continue to call this place home. Well, there's ways to address that. And again, it requires people who are at the top not to be asked and have a sense of artists are entitled to getting help from the rich, but instead this, man, I am the rich and I love Austin and I want to make sure that it continues to be this way because, one, I get value out of it, and two, it's about something bigger than me.
Yeah. So on that note, I always like to end on the same question. Brian, what's next, Austin?
Yeah, what's next, Austin, is getting back to and making the voice louder that Austin has been special, is special, will continue to be special. And I do think that these membership organizations play a critical role in that, so that people don't feel lonely, that they feel like they're supported, and ultimately that they're getting value as they grow. And if that's happening, then back to what I said at the beginning, healthy things grow, right? And that starts with an individual, but then it goes to the city and beyond as a whole.
Fantastic. Brian, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, it was fun, Jason. Good seeing you, man.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.